Okay, so this is that perforated steel, and it comes in, it's made by a company called Hillman. I find it at Fleet Farm, Menards. I didn't check Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever yet, but it's probably going to be all there. And then what you're looking for is right here where it'll say 12 gauge or 14 gauge. And what I was able to find at Fleet Farm was 12 gauge for 15 bucks, and then I found the same stuff but 14 gauge at Menards for the same price. So it doesn't make too much of a difference when we're talking only the 4-inch pieces. And so basically they're only going to be 4 inches long, and 12 gauge versus 14 gauge probably isn't going to make any difference. But if you get into making wider beams, so instead of making 2-inch beams, you're going to make 4-inch beams or 6-inch beams, well, then you're going to start spanning more, and there's going to be a huge amount of pressure. Or if you're using the same clamp bars, like a 6-inch clamp bar, to do a 2-inch beam. Now you can do that, but then it only uses up 2 inches of this beam, and then there's a huge amount of pressure placed on the outside. So it's just kind of something that you got to figure out in terms of, you know, what works out the best. Because I can get the 12 gauge for the same price, I just buy 12 gauge. And then what I'm doing is, all I'm doing to cut it is I have a metal cutting bandsaw, right? So this comes in pretty handy. The only downside is it does leave a burr, and so, and then to mark it, what I've done is, even though there's a stop right here built into it, I could set that for 4 inches, but then if you're a little bit off, every time you advance this further, then you end up losing a little bit or adding a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're no longer in the center between the two holes. So what I found is it's just as simple. You can either just count 1, 2, 3, 4 and place a dot. 1, 2, 3, 4, place a dot. Or you can just measure from one end, the factory end basically, and mark it 4, 8, 12, 16, etc. Either way, you'll come out about the same. And then so to cut this, all I really need to do is place that, trying to reach over here, but I'm placing that piece down there where you can see the mark. I'm letting the bandsaw just come down on itself. That's close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades. Tighten the clamp, the vise on it. Lift it up a hair. Start it. And that's all that's to it. Now, the downside of the bandsaw, and I don't know if it's just mine or the blade or an older blade, but you can see it leaves a pretty sharp little edge right there. And that's going to be on both ends because it was just cut that way as well. So, I don't know if a different saw would handle that, but in the meantime, I'm just going to take it over, these over to my grinder. So here I have a couple of tools. One is just the conventional, the typical grinder, right? Now, it works really well on anything that's on the outside surface, but not stuff on the inside. So there, if you don't have anything else, then if you can just use a file or something like that. You know, again, I'm not a metal worker, so I don't have all those fancy tools. But one that I did pick up years ago, and for various reasons, but I love it, is this little guy. And it basically just has a tiny little piece of sandpaper, and it's meant for going inside. To me, that's the ticket. If you're going to be doing 1,000 of these, it's well worth the tool, right? or just have them pre-cut for you. So that goes inside, but then it also can do the outside as well. So that's all that's to it as far as finishing. These little guys, and again, these would be called the clamp bars. That's the name I gave them. This is a 4-incher. If you're going to go to wider beams, you go to a 6-incher or an 8-incher, usually increments of 2-inch. And again, because it's zinc plated, you don't really have to do anything else to it. So it's as simple as that as far as creating the clamps. Okay, so this is an example of basically how one of these would work. So I've got the 2 of the clamp bars set up. This is 2 out of the possibility of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for a 30-incher. And again, there are 5-inch on center. So these float up and down, right? With the bolts just slightly in there. Then your wood, now this one's already glued up, but this is like 1 3/8, 1 3/8, 1 3/8-ish. Equaling about 4 1/4. So those individual pieces would go in there, and I'm going to have all kinds of samples on actually doing this in a different video and so on, but this is how they're going to work. And then that total height is what equals this. So it's the total height of the raw material plus the thickness of this, which is 1 inch, and then you want to go into the steel, the flange, by about at least, 1/4-ish. But you have to be careful not to go too far.